Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group call. Today's topic is continuing on in our multi-part series on the top 10 best practices for construction contract administration. Today's number is number 5, and we are counting down. So this is actually the 6th one in the series. For those of you that have not seen the previous sessions or would like to go back and review those, feel free to do so on the CSI YouTube channel located at youtube.com/CSIConstruction, all one word. All those videos are located there, along with additional videos from our other practice groups, equaling about 250 to 270 hours of content for you to view for free. With that, I do want to hand it over to our co-chairs, Jim Raines and Douglas Freeman. So Jim and Doug, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everyone. We will continue on here with our best practices.
Yeah, it's good to have everybody on the call. Happy post-Memorial Day. So we're continuing a series here that plagiarizes Mr. Letterman a bit for the top 10 construction contract administration best practices. And if we look at the next screen, we take a quick look at what we've talked about so far. Best practice number 10, which is to have fun. We believe that scheduling time for that will make sure that it happens, and it seems like time gets away from us all. If we don't put it on the calendar, we don't do it. So taking an opportunity to celebrate the end of shop drawing review, why not? The next was best practice number 9, remembering your pants pocket. When you buy your pants at Walmart like me, you stick your hand in the pocket and they're inspected by number 6. It's a busy guy. I don't know where he lives, but he inspects a lot of pants, and that is all about having a quality control, quality assurance program in place in your firm so that you can catch the mistakes and the holes and the cracks when it's easiest fixed in your office rather than in the field. Best practice number 8, teamwork creates winners. Certainly this is a team sport that we are in the design and construction business, and finding ways to enhance and create a real team atmosphere and a collaborative work environment is really important. Best practice number 7, hold costs in check, being sure that you understand in your documents what you specify and create as far as markups, tracking pay applications, finding the things that are on the site that are being billed for and keeping your eyes on that, keeping the momentum on the project going, keeping payments flowing between the construction community and the owner are all important to a positive project outcome. And best practice number 6, admitting mistakes is ethically sound, but maybe not what the risk management folks would like to hear us say. Certainly something that you should always discuss with them about raising your hand and saying, hey, that's my bad. But it certainly makes sense to us ethically to represent yourself as a professional and take responsibility when that's the right thing to do. So that leaves us with the next slide, best practice number 5, which is look at and use the documents. Seems like that'd be easy enough to think of, but certainly is something worth remembering and discussing. So Matthew, let's take a look at the next slide. One of the imperative things that we do as a designer, architect, engineer is visiting the site. And those visits are periodic, and there are opportunities for us to use our professional judgment as to how often we need to be there. Often your contract with your client spells out the frequency of your visits. Those visits are observations, with the exception of 2 that are inspections. One that is an inspection for substantial completion, and one that is an inspection for final completion. But otherwise, you're spot checking the job. You're taking a selective sample of where things are with regard to progress. And in order to do that, you as the observer need to have a thorough knowledge of the contract documents and the construction contract administration process. so that you're capable of identifying, most particularly, any non-conforming work that's on the site. And so how really can you do this if you don't look at and use the very documents that you've created before you visit the site, while you're at the site, and even after you've returned from the site? So these frequencies of the visits that you make are really connected to critical work activities, concrete placement, or anything that is enclosure or drywall where you might not be able to look at something again. So those phases will be reflected in a construction progress schedule, and then you would select your visits to the site accordingly and make those visits culminate with the proper documentation of your site observation report and the distribution of that document. So I just go back to this for a second and ponder on how could we possibly not be using the documents as we're at the site. And I'll say, oftentimes I find the design individuals walk the job, but with not much in hand. And Doug and I often talk about how you ought to look with rolled up drawings under one arm and a spec book and some shop drawings and the like as you stumble around the site to see what the activity is to date. So let's go to the next slide, Matthew. While you were there and I'll talk here for a minute and then I'll let Doug speak some and take a look and see if we have any hands raised. But just as important, your responsibilities are at the site. Also, it is important for you to know what you're not responsible for while you're there. And as you're looking at the documents and rendering your best personal judgment and professional judgment of the status of the work to date, there are some things that you aren't responsible to do. You're certainly not responsible for continuous inspections unless for some reason your contract documents say something different. You certainly are not responsible for construction means and methods or project safety. Those things are clearly delineated as the contractor's responsibility. You're not responsible for the contractor's failure to perform. We have responsibilities in documenting and denoting information like that, but it is not your responsibility. And you also are not authorized to stop the work of the contractor. That is something that clearly is the owner's task to undertake, but not ours. So just with that, let me pause and turn it over to Doug and also ask Matthew if there are any questions so far.
Thank you, Jim. Going back to some comments on the previous slide, as Jim said, you need to use the documents, have them with you when you're making your site visits, so you can understand and know what it is that you're looking at, what's expected, what the design intent was, and that probably becomes most important when the person that is doing the site visits or doing the construction administration may not have been involved day to day in the design or in the production of the documents. And it's not just the drawings and the specs. You also need to be aware of and act in accordance with what is in the construction contract. So that's another contract document that you need to be aware of and use when you're doing construction administration. The contract between the owner and the contractor. And the last, well, not necessarily the last, but another piece, because we'll talk about some other stuff as we move forward, but another piece is your contract, the design contract with the owner. You need to know what's in there, what the expectations are, what your obligations and responsibilities are, and how can you do that if you don't use those documents and know what's in them. It probably would not hurt to take a peek at them every so often, if not every time before you go out to the site, and to have them available to everyone that's working on the project so that the entire team is aware of what it is that they are responsible and obligated to perform under the terms of the contract. Matthew, do we have any hands raised or any questions submitted?
We don't have any questions submitted yet. There was one requesting about the slides, so I have left a message on the screen. Hopefully everyone has seen that. A copy of today's slides in PDF form are in the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel, so feel free to download those slides as you go through today's session or afterwards. Other than that, we are quiet, and I can hand it back to both you and Jim.
Great. Well, let's go to the next slide, Matthew. And as Doug pointed out, incredibly important for you to know what your contract with your client says about your involvement during the construction phase, and just as critical, as Doug said, what the contractor's contract with the owner says about what they are supposed to do. So I'm sure you've been on a job where you have heard the words, this is how we've always done it. Please, please don't ever say that. Don't use that term. Each project has its unique characteristics, and even if you are a firm that does prototype work, each job changes. And we pause on this to talk about it because think about, well, it's graduation time. There are a lot of individuals who are going out to find their first jobs in firms, and they're going to work on projects that they've never worked on before. These are new people in the firm. So as you bring employees into your organization, you also are bringing in new ways that we've always done it. They may not know your way yet. And so it's important that you're sure about what is within the contract documents, because as Doug just pointed out, it may not be you that did the design, that did the drawing, and there may be surprises there for you, particularly if you haven't had a quality control process in place. So take the time to be sure that you do know what's in those documents as you walk around the site, and this is what we say. You can't do that without having them under your arm. Be sure that what you are using is also the most current set of documents. I've worked on a lot of projects where there were, unfortunately, a lot of addenda that had to be issued, maybe because of costs, maybe other reasons that the owner expanded or modified the program, and then right into construction where unforeseen circumstances were found and bulletin drawings had to be issued to deal with different aspects within the project. Be sure that the documents you are using when you're on the site and when you're walking around are the most up-to-date. Often firms will create small sets that are easy to carry around while you're out on the job so that they're convenient for you to walk around with. Most of the projects that Doug and I work on have a requirement for the general contractor to maintain a set of drawings on the construction site we have access to, and that they be up to date and appropriately marked with addenda both in the specs and on the drawings, and any kind of bulletin drawings as well. So there's a little bit of work involved in being sure that you've got the most current up-to-date documents as you travel about the job.
To piggyback on that, there are project management software programs that are available now to where instead of taking a half-size set or a roll of drawings, it can sometimes be cumbersome depending on the size of your project. to where you load the drawings onto a cloud, your server, a tablet, and then what you're walking around with is just your iPad or your tablet, and you're looking at the drawings on the tablet. So technology has kind of helped us out a bit in what we have to bring to the site, but again, you need to make sure that what you have is the most current and it's up to date. An issue that I've seen in the past is where you have a sheet, a drawing sheet, and you have made a correction, be it addenda or a bulletin, and you've issued that as an 8.5 by 11, and so that 8.5 by 11 has been incorporated into the documents, and then down the road you make another change to that same drawing sheet, and instead of issuing 8.5 by 11, you go back and you change the drawing sheet. If you do that, you need to make sure that that previous correction or change was incorporated onto that sheet if you're reissuing that whole sheet. Because that reissuance of that whole sheet, that's going to become the most current document, and so it should include all of the previous changes, modifications that were made to that sheet. And I've seen that happen where an 8.5 by 11 was issued, and then later on the full sheet was issued, but the full sheet addressed a change that was a new change, and it did not incorporate the previous change. And so you get into issues there because now the contractor's looking at that new full sheet that was issued under the impression, and probably rightly so, that that's the most current, and then yet you have not included the change that you made in 8.5 by 11 bulletin. So like Jim said, it's some work on your part to make sure that you are working with and that your contractor is working with the most current documents, but if you do that, you can save yourself and the contractor and your owner a lot of issues.
That's right.
And
let's go ahead and.
Oh, I was just going to pop in here. We just had an individual asking for clarification on the title of bulletin drawings. If you could kind of describe that a little bit more, that'd be helpful.
When I use the term bulletin drawings, I'm talking about it's just kind of a generic term. It's any drawing that you have issued subsequent to issuing the construction documents that is to become a part of the construction documents. So if you had an issue where you had a dimensional error on a detail and you're going to reissue a 8.5 by 11 corrected detail with the correct dimensions on it, I would call that 8.5 by 11 corrected detail drawing a bulletin drawing.
Okay, and then we had a follow-up to that then. Is there a difference, or is it just a different wording between a bulletin drawing and perhaps an addenda or a drawing revision, or is it just kind of essentially different nomenclature for the same idea?
Well, an addenda is issued pre-bid, and a bulletin is issued post-bid. That would be the distinction I would make. If you're issuing an addendum and it's got drawings included with it, that's pre-bid. Post-bid, it's not an addendum. It's a supplemental instruction, a change proposal, or some other document. But the drawing piece I usually refer to as a bulletin drawing.
That's right, and I think, Doug, like you just said, or architect's supplemental instructions, it could be. There are some different nomenclatures for the title of the drawing or the document, but absolutely right. Any of those would be after the bid, and changes to the documents before the bid would be called addenda.
And we had a few more questions and coming on with this then. So if the collection of the bulletin drawings along with the original set, would that be what's considered to be a conformed set? Or is there a recommendation of completing all of the updates in a final record drawing?
Oh yeah, we both have mostly that experience where there is a requirement for a set of record documents or as-built drawings. Then that's a whole conversation between what do you call it, record drawings or as-built drawings, and different camps in that regard. But yes, it would be a record set of documents that was produced at the end of the project that would involve the inclusion of the addenda and any other subsequent issued information. I don't know if I said that right, Doug, but that's...
Yeah, I think that addressed the record drawing or as-built drawing piece of it. A conformed set, by my definition, would be if I had issued a set of bid documents and then prior to bid there were several addenda, and those addenda had drawing modifications or changes to them, then the conform set to me would be you take all of those addendums and you incorporate them into the documents and you issue a so-called conform set that includes all the addenda so that you, the contractor, and the owner don't have to keep up with all of the 8.5 by 11 written text and bulletin sketches or whatever you want to call them, all of the smaller drawing pieces that were issued in the addendum. You incorporate that into a new set of documents that would be the conform set so that that set had all that information in it and you didn't have to refer back to several different addendums to see what the most current documents were.
Matthew, any others?
Yeah, we had a couple of other ones here. There was a question that came in from David, and I'm not sure necessarily in reference. So, David, if you want to add additional question, please do so. And he just asked more like an ASI, and I'm not familiar with an acronym, so perhaps that means something to both of you.
Yeah, that's what I was saying is an architect's supplemental instructions.
Okay, and then we have another question and a comment here. Kevin brings up clarification here. He always felt that perhaps record documents were produced by the contractor, and doesn't the architect produce conform construction documents?
Well, at the end of the job, I like to call what I get from the contractor that's redlined, where he's marked up what modifications there were in the field and has kept track of all of the changes that have been issued and submits them to the architect. I like to call that the as-builts, in quotes. And then when, per our contract, if we're required to take that information and combine it into a new set of drawings to give to the owner, I like to call that the record drawings. So I use those terms not to mean the same thing. Record drawings is what reproduced based on the information provided from the contractor, and what the information provided by the contractor that he's marked up, I refer to those as record drawings. So I use the terminology that way. It helps me to keep track of what's what, and I think is clearer terminology-wise in that what we are producing is not necessarily a as-built, it's a record based on the information that we've been provided. And I would avoid using the term as-built, because if you have an owner that is not as sophisticated, I would not want to mislead him into thinking that the set I'm going to give him is going to be exactly as it was built, because it may or may not be.
That's a great point. Matthew, as you're doing more questions, let's go ahead to the next couple of slides. The next one will be quick. and then we'll settle on the next slide. So use your shop drawings and your submittals while you're on the project site. Again, a practice that we don't see very often. And let's go ahead to the next one, Matthew, and if there are any questions, stop me and jump in. But so in reference to shop drawings and submittals, what the heck are they and what the heck are they not? And why in the world wouldn't we be taking the opportunity to really use them as a tool? Because I will share candidly and honestly that they get looked at in the office as a processing procedure and go out to the job site, and frequently I don't see them very often anymore. Occasionally with the subcontractors I might catch them with them in their hands, but basically they're out there, and I'll use these quotations, doing it the way they always have, or doing it the way they did it last. Well, these shop drawings are detailed information about the components in the building that include a lot of information that is critical to the way a piece of that project needs to go together, and certainly is an important part of the quality assurance process for the project. And it's an indicator of how the contracted work is supposed to be fulfilled by the parties that are out there. We're doing observations, and we're trying to assure in some fashion that our client has a project that's built in accordance with the contract documents. This is yet another series of tools that could help us do that. So that the owner has detailed information about the product that has actually been put in place on their project. Something that's important to remember that submittals and shop drawings are not is that they are not contract documents, and they are not items which the contract should be modified with by any party. And again, we see that all too often where a substitution is sent in, and shouldn't be, or changes are made that are substantive changes within the product or the assembly of products. That's not the way to change the contract. So these are tools that we believe should come out of the trailer file cabinet and be under your arm and spread out on the concrete, looking at how some curtain wall assembly is going together. Not only to be sure it conforms with your ideas, but so that the people in the field are going about their business as they should. And maybe that teeters a little bit on the edge of means and methods, but I don't think so. Doug?
I don't have anything to add here, Jim. Matthew, do we have anything?
Yeah, it seems like we have some additional questions with regarding, I guess, the clarification of all the different drawing sets and when they're done, what they're called, and who's in charge of them. So we have Robert here chimed in saying that they use the conformed set title for documents that include all addenda and comments from AHJ, and those are indicated as the before construction drawing set. At the same time, we have David Scott coming in here saying that record drawings are what we give owners. As built is what contractor gives architects. And then we have some additional questions here. One from David is saying, when there's a difference between the CDs and the approved shops, which rules? And then I'll let you answer that one before we get into the last question from Bob here as well.
Jim, let me jump in real quick. The first two comments, I think, were in line with what we were talking about earlier, but the point I would like to make here is that when we are putting together these documents, the construction documents, if there is a question about terminology, your specifications is a great place to clear it up. You can certainly, in your specifications, define record drawings, define as-built drawings, define a conformance set. If you're doing sets along the way that are picking up changes as you go along, and you want to call one a pre-construction conformance set and another one a post-construction conformance set, or whatever. Do that in your specifications, and then everybody is clear and on the same page. As far as the question regarding if the shop drawings vary from the construction drawings, the contract documents, as this slide up here details, the contract documents are just that. They're the contract documents. The shop drawings are not contract documents. Shop drawings do not change the requirements of the contract documents. So if there's a variance between the two, the construction drawings, the construction documents, your plans and specs are what should govern. If I'm getting a note saying we're experiencing difficulties with audio, I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. If you want to, if in reviewing the shop drawings you see that something needs to change, that needs to be done with a document that actually changes the requirements of the contract documents with a ASI, or Architectural Supplemental Instructions, or a change order document, or a construction change directive. Those are the only three documents, according to AIA contracts, that actually change the requirements of the contract documents: and a architect supplemental instructions, a construction change directive, or a change order.
That's right, Doug, and this is where I think opportunity for litigation mistakes get made in actually taking those submittals and making modifications, and perhaps the best intentions in thinking that that's the right place to do it. But as Doug pointed out, that there are three ways to change the contract documents, and it's not on the submittals or the shop drawings. And if we go to the next slide, Matthew, I think there's a list of a lot of documents that we're talking about here that are under a title called construction submittals, but there are multiple components here. And jump in and stop me, Matthew. Do we have other questions you want to do first?
There was the question from Bob that I think you all just have covered. So, Bob, if you feel like we haven't addressed it yet, feel free to send me another message. But with that, I'm going to hand it back to you both to continue.
Okay. So within this process of documents that we need to pay attention to and use as a tool are action submittals, like we've been talking about, where they are shop drawings or some other data or samples. There may be informational submittals, like quality control documents. These may be delegated design, test reports, coordination drawings, which we use a lot in North Carolina. There may be other types of certificates or instructions that come from manufacturers, and even including construction photos. Certainly sustainable design submittals, which are a part of any kind of a certification process on a project. And then as you're coming into the close of the job, and maybe smattered throughout, whether you're putting together owner and maintenance manuals, bonds, warranties, any kind of record documents that we just talked about, record documents versus as-built, as well as maintenance materials and the attic stock and tools and parts that come in within your project specifications for your client to maintain and operate the property. So all of these, again, are opportunities, tools in our toolbox of information that we can use to look at the project and attempt to assure the owner and our client that things are being done in accordance with the contract documents. So, you know, we often receive pieces and parts of these various tools that habitually get filed away and maybe not used. I'll touch on one and then be quiet and let Doug respond to others. But for example, any kind of insurance or bond that you have on the project is an important document to look at. If for nothing else, there are renewal dates that are required to keep those in place. And I've unfortunately been on jobs where those expired and we did not see that, catch that, nor notify the owner. Fortunately, nothing happened during that time, but it left a lot of egg on our face that we weren't keeping aware of that. So certainly there are other documents here on this list that are just as important, but that's an example that I've experienced. So I'll hush for Doug and to see, Matthew, if you have any other questions. And Doug, I'm hearing you fine, so I don't know why that's popping up on your machine, but I hear you great.
Okay, good. Along those same lines is with the insurance requirements that may expire is the contractor and the design professional's licensing requirements. We have to renew our licenses every year. And I know of at least one job that I was on where the contractor failed to renew his license. He subsequently did renew it, but it did lapse for a time. He didn't renew it when the license had expired. He didn't renew it right away. But items like that, we probably should try to do a better job of keeping track of. Matthew, do we have anything from the group?
We just have a comment coming in here from Paul Sternberg, who, if I remember correctly, was on the group that helped do our practice guides, noting that there is no specific title for change drawings, i.e. what we've been calling bulletin drawings in this presentation, within the CSI practice guides. They go with whatever CA document used to transmit the information, RFI, ASI, proposal request, construction change directive, change order, etc. So for any of you that may also be studying for an upcoming CSI exam or have used the CSI practice guides in the past, don't be confused in the sense Paul's indicated that we do not have a specific title that we call it by CSI's publications. This is just additional information within this session. Other than that, it looks like we have answered most of the questions that have come in so far.
Paul is absolutely correct, and neither does the AIA documents identify a so-called bulletin drawing. That's a term that has been used for as long as I can remember that I've been in the profession to give a name or a label to the drawing that. And again, if it would go with the ASI or the change proposal request or whatever other document that is being attached to.
Well, let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and we'll talk a little bit about responsibilities. Why are we looking at the documents, and why is it so important for us to be using that tool? Well, out of our practices, what are we responsible for? Well, for specifying reasonable requirements and understanding our own contract documents, being sure the contractor has performed their duty when we receive submittals, knowing the construction schedule and the time of submittals that they can be incorporated into the project, that reviewing those submittals for design intent and coordination with other submittals is something that is our responsibility. Managing the distribution of all of that information to the appropriate parties, and then managing that final return and distribution. So, for example, if there are electrical, mechanical, and some architectural components that need to relate, that we are responsible for obtaining all of that input and returning those to the appropriate contractor. And then keeping all that current and keeping records available to be able to use at the site. But I just add this along with the submittals here, this note that without this process being satisfied, there are opportunities that can be missed with particularly coordination between trades within the submittals. Doug and I both have labored hours and hours over something that was left out here or there. Maybe perhaps it could have been caught in managing this part of the documentation. Again, understanding they're not contract documents, but certainly feeding the coordination abilities of the team. And so, Matthew, if we don't have any questions, let's go to the next slide and talk about another opportunity of documents, and those are your what we term as front-end documents, which are equally as important as the drawings and are something that you have full authorship to produce. And so our easy statement here is not to paint yourself into a corner and do what you said you'd do. So I'll use the return of information as an example. If you have in your front-end documents, in your supplementary conditions or your general conditions, that you will move a pay application through your office in 15 days, and you set dates in that document that say when you will receive a pay application from a contractor, when you will review it, when you will execute that and forward it to the client, and when in the end that contractor will be paid, then those dates should be real and should be achievable and should be accurate. Do what you said. Or don't write it that way. So many times we see time frames laid out in a process of moving a pay application that just simply are not achievable. And our experiences have been that if you'll include what is achievable in your general conditions, or expand upon your general conditions with supplementary information to describe how a pay application is going to be processed, then the construction community is fine to participate in that process and won't have any issue with it. It's when we don't follow through on what we said we would do that causes issues. And so we've talked a lot about construction drawings and other items, but those front-end documents are very critical to the process of managing a project. Doug?
Make sure you coordinate those front-end documents with your owner's requirements and your owner's business practices. As Jim was laying out the example of the payment application, if you are always used to saying, submit me a draft by this date and submit me the final by this date, and I'll have it in the owner's hands by the 1st, you're under the assumption that the 1st is the best time and the owner will have it on the 1st, and then he can cut a check and the contract will be paid in 2 weeks. And the owner's business is set up as to where they don't cut checks until the last Friday of every month. Then your contractor is going to be expecting to get paid by the 15th, and the owner is not going to be expecting to cut a check until the last Friday of the month, and so you've got a big gap there where, depending on how your documents are written, you may be obligating your owner to paying interest charges for a period of time. So, and it's not just processing payment applications, it's meeting requirements and all of that stuff that's in Division 1. Make sure that you review that and coordinate that stuff with your owner so that it is in sync with the owner's requirements and the owner's business practices.
Absolutely. Another great example that Doug just reminded me of is change orders. You know, if you have to meet with a board that manages a facility or an educational system, for example, and they have to take action on changes over a certain amount of money, you know, that whole process can be documented and included in your Division I document so that the construction community knows what parameters they have to meet. So, Matthew, any questions?
Just some comments that came in here from David again. You said shops, I'm assuming you mean shop drawings, are the most likely last place you can avoid errors and omission claims when you get to pay for it. And then he also indicated that larger project clients usually create the front documents.
I think that's been my experience too, and often it is a fight to modify those documents. In the design process, you know, it's sometimes difficult and very onerous to convince your client to listen to your expertise. But as we see here, documentation is everything, and having it done thoroughly and appropriately, conclusively, is where you want to be, because it is what will matter the most if you unfortunately end up here in court on your project. So looking at those documents and using them, and as someone has said before, being conspicuously present with all of this as you do your job site observations is, we believe, good advice. And so let's go to the next slide and talk about some of those documentation procedures as you're out there on the job. Record keeping and reporting is so critical, and documenting the activities is a critical part of our job, whether, as Doug was saying, there are some programs out there that exist that help you do this, or whether it's a hard copy form that we're using. That there are many softwares that support an excellent service, and we encourage you to look at those and see if they fit for your organization. It's just a process of a steady stream of information that makes time a critical component in handling all of it. And we find, in our experience, that having a standardization within your organization, maybe it's a standardization within your client's organization, that will expedite that whole process. So whether it's observational reports or correspondence, whichever one of these, and you can see the list there, that you need to manage and utilize, then find those, standardize them within your organization, and we'll take a look here in just a minute at some examples of that as we move on to the other slides. Let's go to the next one, Matthew. Doug, is there anything you have to add to that?
No, let's keep going.
Okay. So if we take one as our observation reports, then what do we want to encourage here? Well, we record when we're at a site, and as Doug has talked about before, recording exactly what you're there to do, whether it's just a moment that you were on the site or whether it was a full observation, should be denoted. There are recording devices that are really helpful. Having your last site report is really helpful to be able to document what you did before. And both CSI and AIA have forms that we'll take a look at here in a second. Whatever you use, it should be able to be quickly done and distributed, preferably within a day of your visit, so that it's timely information. especially critical if you have action items within your reports. But it's imperative that you're objective, you're factual, and you're complete in these reports. And again, the way to do that is by looking at and using the documents that you've created as you're doing these observations. One of the most important things to deal with as you cover your job site is anything that's non-conforming. If it's non-conforming and that's not going to change, then that work needs to be rejected as soon as you can possibly do it, and a process put in place to handle that early within your firm and move on to corrections is critical to the life of your project. You also should discuss any claims, whether they've been reported or not, something on the job that you're able to find out as you visit the project. But again, reiterating what you should be doing is documenting factual, complete, and objective information, not extraneous information, not hearsay, conjecture. Just stick to the facts. So you see a list there of things that are important to include when you do the visit, and I won't read through those, but Matthew, if we go to the next slide, then you can see examples of both the CSI report and then just a standardized report created for an independent company. There are so many of these available, and as Doug has talked about, so many options that are out there for you to use within various softwares. So, Doug, I'll stop there and we can move back and forth between slides if you want to go back and share any additional information.
No, Jim, I think you covered it pretty well. It looks like we've got about 5 minutes left, so let's see if we've got anything from the group before we wrap things up.
Okay. At this time, we don't seem to have any comments. So if anybody does have it, Dave just said thanks. I don't know if anyone else has any other comments before we move on to the last two slides here.
I'll just add one more note about using the documents. If you are on your site, please have access, as Doug has described, on your tablet with a software project management program or a rolled up set of drawings under your arm. Take the time when you're doing these things that we've talked about to listen to the professionals that are in the field. Doug and I both talk about this every time we're with someone in this business, that there are craftspeople out there who are very much professionals and who can share so much information with us if we'll take the time to listen. So we both encourage you to stop, to take your time, to set aside the right time to be out on your site looking at these documents and listening to those professionals that are there on a daily basis. It's where I've learned so much that I had no idea I didn't know, and it's a real opportunity.
All right, we did have one question and one comment pop in here. Oh, and another one just says, well, so Barry is asking, are handwritten notes equal to electronic observation reports in court?
It would depend, I guess, on whether or not they were shared. If you've got handwritten notes documenting stuff that you saw out in the field and you didn't share it with the contractor that vary from your field observation report that was published, then I would say that the courts are going to give deference to the document that was published. If you take one of these forms and handwrite it as opposed to doing it with the software, the handwritten is just as legally binding or has just as much legal weight as if it was prepared with a typewriter or a word processing software.
So if it's your standard of practice that your information is issued handwritten, and that's the standard that you've maintained and distributed that information to everyone, then that, as far as I know too, that would be fine, like Doug said.
All right, we had a comment came in here from Facile indicating we should also keep in mind dates a permit will expire and limitations posted by the permit. So that's another comment here to come in with.
Yeah.
And then we have a question here coming in from John that I'm not sure if he'll be able to answer, but he indicates that he understands that Pennsylvania is now allowing architects to be in lawsuits that involve safety. How would you suggest we protect ourselves from this action?
Well, there are a lot of houses for sale in North Carolina. I don't know, maybe I'm being facetious there. That's a really good question. Doug, I don't know.
Well, without knowing the specifics about what is going on in Pennsylvania, one thing I would say is use the cliche, stay in your lane. If your contract states that you are not responsible for job site safety, don't go out on the site and conduct yourself in a manner or say things that would put you in a position to where you are assuming that responsibility. Talk to your insurance providers, talk to your risk management folks, talk to your attorneys, and just make sure that you are doing what you're obligated to do and not going beyond that and assuming responsibility for any safety issues. What I've seen is most times when an architect is brought into a safety issue, it's because they've done that. They've gone beyond what they were obligated to do, what they were responsible for, and assumed the safety responsibility. Or they observed a condition and chose to ignore it. If you see something, our first, at least here in North Carolina, our first obligation is to the safety, life safety, health, safety, welfare of the public. And so if you are on a job site and you see a guy that's in a trench that's 8 foot deep and there's no shoring and it's not cut back, he's at risk. And as a licensed professional, as an architect, you are responsible, you're obligated to address that situation.
I would also say that checking in with your professional organizations in Pennsylvania, whether it's the architects, the engineers, the risk management associations, as Doug stated, but checking with the professional associations as well. There may be some helpful information there on how to best protect yourself as a resource. Matthew, any others?
No, we just had a comment come in here from David that is a question a lot of people always have, asking about AIA continuing education for this information. Just a reminder that practice groups are an open forum session, and as a result, we can never guarantee what content we'll get through within an hour, limiting our availability to submit this for AIA credit. However, if you do wish to personally submit this as self-reporting, you can email me after the session requesting a certificate of attendance, or simply take the email that should come from GoToWebinar within the next 24 hours, thanking you or confirming you attended the session and using that for your reports as well. With that, then, you see here on the screen as we are a few minutes over the hour here, and I don't want to stop the conversation, but I also have another meeting that is starting at 1.
Right.
So with that, I'll let Jim and Doug wrap up as you see the date on the screen here, and I'll go to the next slide that has the emails as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here. Enjoy your summer. Be safe, and we'll be back with you in August. Doug?
Thanks, everyone. And as Jim just said, we're taking a couple of months off, so we will see you back in August. And we appreciate all of the participation today.